Welcome back to Bastionland Broadcasting. We are doing an Electric Bastionland deep dive today, but before I go into the game, I can show you a bit of the game that we spoke about last week. Last week we were looking at the Bastion section, and specifically we ended up on the random cocktails table here. And what we ended up with, I said I'll roll 2 cocktails and I'll see if I can make them next week. And in fact, I said I was going to make 1. I ended up rolling 2 because the first one sounded quite nice. So I got gin and cherry wine. And then for the second cocktail, I got grass spirit and anchovy sauce, which sounded a bit more challenging. So I've spent the week getting this ready now. So despite the order that I've rolled them, I'm going to start by creating the cocktail that uses grass spirit and anchovy sauce. And this is what you come for. You come here expecting to learn about the insight into the design of this role-playing game, but actually you're just going to get me making drinks and drinking them on stream. So it's a bit of a different feel tonight. I can see I've lost viewers already. This could be my downfall. This might be the one. I'm gonna make the first one. I'm going to use I'm going to go straight in with the fish sauce. Sorry, anchovy sauce as specified, and a grass spirit. And I'm going to give you a little bit of a cocktail spiel as we go, because cocktails is one of my other passions alongside role-playing games. As I am mixing this up, I'm accepting suggestions for the name of this cocktail, and then when it's complete I will reveal which one I think is the best. So I've got the most important ingredient for a cocktail. Yeah, Agonarch Artist. I'm afraid nobody thinks you wrote Bastionland sober. I don't write drunk at all, and that's not a good combination for me. If I've had a drink, I'm not very good at writing. Big ice is key. It's already melting, it's so hot in here. But 1 big ice cube is better than a lot of small ice cubes. When I put grass spirit in that list, I think I was thinking of something like a sort of rum agricole, or like a kind of grassy, some of those sort of sugarcane based rums are quite grassy. And I've had a few, I can't remember the name of it, but I had like a Chinese spirit at some point that, this focus today is not staying with me. A sort of grassy Chinese spirit. So what I did, because I didn't have any of those things in my bar, I have infused, spilling it all over my desk. I've infused some vodka with lemongrass, because I had some fresh lemongrass. I had the good sense to bring a cloth with me. I'm very glad I did that. So I thought, yeah, grass spirit will make a lemongrass infusion. Right, let's do this. You're gonna be like you're on a Food Network now. So let's move my mouse well out of the way. So here's our mixing tin. We are gonna have with cocktails like this, it's gonna be going in an up glass, like a martini glass. So it's gonna be aiming for about 3 ounces total. And for this one, I said I was allowed 1 extra ingredient. So I've got the grass spirit. I want that to be the main thing. So I'm going to give that like 2 ounces. So that's 1.5 ounces plus a half. I'm going to do very rough measures because I think, that is a lot more than 2. Okay, it's going to be a big one. It's going to be a big one. That's fine. And then for the anchovy sauce, I mean, originally, when I wrote anchovy sauce, I was thinking Worcestershire sauce. Which does work obviously very well in like a Bloody Mary. I'm sure it can work well in other cocktails. But when I was doing lemongrass, I thought, should I just go whole hog and have fish sauce from sort of Thai food? So this is a lot saltier, but I think Worcestershire sauce is so vinegary and spicy and savoury. I think it will just dominate anything that any flavours that make it into this infusion. So I'm just going to add a couple of dashes of fish sauce. I've never used fish sauce in a cocktail before. We'll do 3 dashes. And then we're going to, for my extra ingredient that I'm allowed, I've got lemongrass, I've got Is this like the world's worst MacLeod? It's getting there. So for my extra ingredients, I thought lime is going to be my saviour here. So we've got fish sauce, we've got lemongrass. It's just going to be like a delicious sort of tom yum soup in a cocktail, basically, isn't it? So from an average lime, you'll get about 1 ounce. So I'm going to do the whole lime. And so then we're basically looking at like a 2-to-1 ratio of lemongrass vodka to lime with your fish sauce. And then because it's got fruit juice in it, we're going to shake it. And I think dilution and being cold is really going to help this be palatable. So I will now have a quick smell. You get the fish sauce first. On the first smell, I thought you're not going to get the fish sauce here. It's going to be lost, but you definitely do get it. We have our glass. This webcam's not focusing on anything. This could have been a beautiful scene, but it's really being ruined by the webcam's autofocus. We're going to strain this into here. We're not going to garnish because I've got strong opinions on garnishes. I think there is a time and a place, but I do not think every cocktail needs to have a garnish. And then we will try the cocktail. So, names. Before I taste it, this focus. Come on, camera. Yeah, the fish sauce is going to be bringing some interesting notes. Let's say it's quite salty and savoury. Let's have a taste. What's going on with this webcam? It really does not want to focus on me. If I feel like this is the only way to get it to focus. Is I have to like trick it into seeing that I'm here. Or is it just the blurry vision from like the fact that I've mixed a cocktail? So I'm just going to try it and see how we go. Oh, okay. So my initial observation is I was hoping this would be like a secret, like a secret win here, and I would discover a great new family of cocktails. Hang on, I can't be doing with this. We're gonna get this. There we go. My focus is back. All I have to do is pick the keyboard up and threaten to mess with the settings. So with cocktails generally, it's very rare to get a cocktail that doesn't have any sweet component at all. Even a dry cocktail like a martini, you're getting a little bit of, there is like a bit of residual sugar in a dry vermouth, so that's still bringing a bit of sweetness to it. It's very uncommon to get a cocktail where you've got citrus juice and then no sweetness to back it up. But I thought any kind of sweetness in with the fish sauce is going to be weird. So it's very sharp. Oof, it's bracing. I think it gets worse the more that I drink. And the fish sauce is really quite full on. I think people would be loving this in Bastion. I think this would be, in general, historically sort of very dry cocktails were seen as very kind of modern, cosmopolitan drinks. And sort of sweet cocktails were sometimes thought of as kind of a rural thing. So the cocktail I'll be making at the end of the stream is a lot sweeter. It's not great, but it fits into Bastionland. I think weirdly, the one thing that might save it is maybe if it was even saltier. Maybe if it had a little bit, a pinch of salt in it, you could lean into the saltiness of it. If it was honestly should have gone, yeah. Vira says should have gone with the Worcestershire sauce. I don't think the Worcestershire sauce would have helped here. I think Worcestershire sauce works in like a Bloody Mary or a Red Snapper because you've got the tomato and you've got lots of other things to round it out. This lemongrass vodka, it's actually not that, the infusion hasn't picked up that much flavour from the lemongrass. You get a little bit of that kind of herbaceous grassiness, but it's not picked up enough to round it out. So I will finish this off because I'm a man of my word. but that was not an enjoyable cocktail. Later in the cast, I will be doing a much nicer cocktail that only uses ingredients that I would choose to drink, and it's actually going to be pretty good. I'm pretty excited for the cherry and gin one. Let's look at these names. This is a rough night already. Brackish Delirium from Fred Dorian Gray. Dunwater Dunk from The Sky Full of Dust. Fisherman's Delight from Oso Taki. Bubble Obscene from Vira. You can name it Stay Focus. Rithuan. Yeah, it's like the webcam knew that this was not something that it wanted to focus on. I wish my taste buds could have done the same. I'm going to stick with Brackish Delirium from Fredorian Grey. That's a strong name. Right, this water is going to be delicious, and then we will actually talk about role-playing games. So, I haven't actually thought this far ahead. I've spent so much time today thinking about this cocktail and how to do this, that it's now snuck up on me that I've got to actually talk about the game. So if you haven't been to one of these deep dives before, it doesn't always start with me making a drink. This is the first time we've branched out. It's part of the reason is I've been really enjoying doing these streams, and we're actually kind of getting towards the end of the book now. There's at least a few deep dives left. I don't think even the next one is going to be the last one. I estimate we've got maybe 3 or 4 weeks of this left, because we're going to hit the end of the book relatively soon, and after that I'm probably going to do one at least where I demonstrate some of the bits of the book in a bit more detail, so creating a borough or using the sort of techniques in the sections for creating characters, things like that. And what I wanted to do was today, as a sort of sideline question, if you like, while I've got you guys all here, is what would you like to see on this stream? So one thing that I am doing on Sunday, I'm doing an actual play with the guys from Tuesday Night Games, Sean McCoy and Alan Girding. And we're going to be doing an actual play of Electric Bastionland, 2 players, 1 conductor, keeping it simple for the first time. So I'm going to be doing some actual plays. I'm going to be doing some demonstrations of how to create a borough. But what else would you like to see on these streams if I run out of deep dives to do? If I was going to carry on doing them, what would people like to see? And as always, if you've got questions, feel free to ask, and I will try and get to them sort of as we work our way through the book. So I will now get myself set up, and we will go over to Electric Bastionland. So we're done with this cocktail table for now. Let's go on, because we are now in Deep Country. So Deep Country, I think it was originally, I think there may have been a point where it was just called like the countryside, or wild country maybe, or something like that. I ended up on the name Deep Country because I've said before that Bastionland is very much, obviously I grew up in England, and a lot of it is based on my own background and my own sort of cultural references, if you like. But I didn't want it to feel like this is just fantasy England. Like, I didn't want to have it be explicitly like someone who's reading it and they're from Malaysia or Brazil or Canada, and they're reading it and they're like, oh yeah, this reads like it's supposed to be Bastion is London and Deep Country is sort of Little England, if you like. So so the deep element was really there to kind of conjure a little bit of an American feel. We're kind of like the deep south, and although it's not drawing exclusively from that, it's by leaning into that kind of slightly American feel, it makes it feel more modern in some ways, because there's less history in America. So it sort of conjures a more modern setting by default, really. And what Alec has done with Deep Country is great, because it's almost like it looks like an alien landscape in some places, which is kind of what I wanted. I said, like, go wild with it and make it feel very different to Bastion. But yeah, I'm pretty happy with it. Hang on, I'm getting some issues. Let me address these tech issues before we get in too deep. There we go. So now we can see. So as with Bastion, let's hide me for a second so everyone can see. As with Bastion, I wanted to have the 2-page spreads be something that you can just open up, and that's everything you need for your needs. So this is the spread that you open up if you're deciding to run a game in Deep Country and you don't know anything about Deep Country. It's like your starting point. So we've got the principles. Things were better before, things are simplistic, and everything is inconvenient. So again, it's like a mirror of Bastion, really, where Bastion has everything is complicated. Deep Country has things are simplistic. So in Bastion there's too much complexity, in Deep Country there's not enough. Bastion is all about moving forward and modernity, and things are in many ways better than they've ever been. But Deep Country, things were always better before. It's all about the decline here. And everything is inconvenient. Anything that you want to do, if you're used to a modern life in Bastion, you're going to find it inconvenient out here in Deep Country. So again, we've got spark tables that can be used for anything. So let's think about what we could use this spark table here for. So these ones are meant to be kind of generic, where you could use it for anything. So let's do a little roll, 2d20, and just see what we end up with. So we're going to roll 7 and 1. That's going to give us birds and harvest. So birds and harvest, if it's an event, it could be that this part of Deep Country, they are literally harvesting birds. Maybe they have birds that they use for the harvest. Maybe they have to fight off birds during harvest season. Maybe they dress up like birds for a harvest festival. And then let's look at the inverse of it. So if we had 7 and 1, 1 and 7 would be soil raid. So soil raid, I like that a lot. I like the idea of one village jealously raiding another village for its precious soil. Maybe it has soil that grows extra large vegetables, and they're sort of raiding it as one might raid gold from another village. And yeah, that's the kind of pettiness that I wanted to get across in Deep Country. And the thing about Deep Country and Bastion is they're both... So I grew up in a very rural area in the Midlands in England, and it was a very small town surrounded by little tiny villages, and you know, we were like an hour away from the nearest city, and it's always jarring seeing the difference between the places where I grew up and then going to a big city. And I feel like I've lived in cities since I was sort of 18 years old now, and I now live in Manchester, sort of the second biggest city in the UK, and it's I feel like I've now earned the right to poke fun at both cities and the countryside. So both Deep Country and Bastion are kind of filmed through the lens of the other one. So Bastion is like an exaggerated version of what outsiders think the city is like. So one of the examples that I used in the art brief for Alec was, imagine like a 12th century peasant is dragged out of France and placed in modern day Manhattan, and they have a few hours to wander around and see things, and then they get catapulted back to their home. How would they describe the city? And that's what I wanted Bastion to look like. And similarly, Deep Country is kind of like, what if all the stereotypes that city people have about country people were true? So, you know, people are backwards thinking. They're always arguing between villages. Nothing gets done. It's all just stuck in the past and tradition. So yeah, it's not fair on either of them. So they both get the short end of the stick. And this idea of traveling back in time was something that I really wanted to lean into. It sort of fits in with the underground, where there's quite a few bits of the world that sort of bend reality a bit. So in many ways, space and time are kind of really connected in Bastion, like in Bastionland. So Bastion kind of defies space because it's too large to sort of work out, and Deep Country is the same. It's huge, but the further away you travel from Bastion, it's like actually going back in time. And are you actually going back in time? You could really lean into that and have a sort of really weird, trippy experience there. And yeah, then there's just some basic guidance here on travel, villages, failed cities, country folk, and the wilderness. So again, one thing that I've kind of I stumbled onto here was the idea that people have been everywhere in Deep Country. So it's not like a big untamed wilderness. It's like people are people have this urge to explore, and especially people in Deep Country, they've kind of explored it, and the locals know their way around. You're not going into some fresh new world. This is somebody's home, but it's going to feel very different to you. But somebody's been there, but maybe there's no reason to go back. For mapping, it's very similar to Bastion. The main differences are, I didn't want to do hex mapping. Sorry, I'm leaning on a wire and it's very distracting. There we go. So I didn't want to do a hex mapping thing. I wanted to do something a bit different. And the route mapping system was originally designed for Bastion, so I thought, how can I adapt it to work in Deep Country? And it's actually very similar. But the main thing I wanted to focus on was this idea of landmarks. So you've got, if you imagine you're in the middle of the wilderness, it's very easy to let me hide myself so you can see the screen while I'm talking. If you imagine you're in the wilderness, you're in the middle of sort of a forest or a field. It's actually, you could end up in a situation where you've got to decide which direction to go, and it's not like a dungeon where you can go left or right, and it's not like being in a city where you can say, oh, where do you want to go? You're looking for a particular shop or a particular borough or a particular service. Instead, you've got to sort of look around. So I wanted to make this focus on landmarks. And this is something I've seen a number of OSR blogs talk about, is this kind of landmarked based wilderness. And the thing that really made it make sense to me was playing, last week I spoke about this game, Zelda Breath of the Wild, because that game is designed around landmarks. So you have your map and everything, but generally most of the places you're going to find and go and explore, you'll spot them from the top of a hill or the top of a tower, and they don't, when you climb the tower, they don't show up on your map like in certain games where you unlock kind of a load of icons that appear on your map. Instead, you've got to actually get up, look through your binoculars, and spot points to go and explore. And the world is very much designed in this way. There's a really interesting video about it. If you search for sort of Breath of the Wild landmarks, I'm sure you'll see, where a lot of the world was designed so that people would, when they're playing, they'd sort of go around the corner of a hill, or they'd come out of a wood, and they'd see, things would be there for them to see, like something would just be peeking over the horizon, like a big rock that was a funny shape, or they'd just see like the tip of a tower, and it was designed to sort of draw them away and draw them off their path. So I wanted to lean into that a bit with the landmarks, and yeah, I've used this quite a few times. I think it works well. I'd probably use this one more than the Bastion mapping system, to be honest. I think for Bastion I can sometimes just blag it and make stuff up as I go along, but for Deep Country I like to have a map so I can have these landmarks that they can see. And Deep Water, yeah, this is a tricky one. To be completely honest, I've never actually used this, and I think looking at it, it's a little bit fiddly. I would be interested to try it out, but I've not really done a sort of deep water base game at the moment. So that's mapping deep country. Conducting deep country. So again, this is your equivalent to your like GM screen. I wanted this to be something you could just have open and it's got everything you need. So this is where you get things like hostile environment rules and camping out rules and how to get to Bastion and back. But yeah, camping, it's kind of, again, there's a lot of common sense. Like it says here that if you don't sleep for at least 4 hours, you're deprived. But if you read the deprived rule, you should be able to work that out for yourself, because being deprived is like being deprived of a need. And, you know, if you don't get any sleep, you're deprived of one of your needs that you have. And the encounters are sort of drawn from the blog in many ways. A lot of them, so that the first table, In Sight of Bastion Smoke, some of these are from a table of river encounters I did. This hippo is brutal. Like, I sometimes warn about people when they ask me about how to create enemies for Into the Odd, or like monsters. I always say that the times when I've had monsters not feel right at the table, it's because they've had too much protection. So they've had both high armor, high HP, and high strength, and that sort of triple threat makes something very difficult to take down. And sometimes you want that, because not everything can be killed. You know, this hippo, the best thing to do if this hippo attacks you probably isn't try and kill it. You either try and divert it, or get away from it, or trick it into, you know, killing itself somehow, going into a trap. But yeah, this hippo takes a real beating before it goes down. And then some of the other ones are from the Wreck Worshippers. They're based on a little blog post I did that was about a sort of railway themed campaign adventure. I think the Justice Women were in there as well. And yeah, then the next table, Encounters Deeper into the Past. These are from the Old Skuntroy posts that I did, which was the Old Country, which is literally like a sort of bit of a medieval setting in deep country. So I had an idea, like I wanted to do something to do with knights and inheritance, and I'd probably been playing too much Crusader Kings at the time, and I thought, right, I want to do this, I can make the whole setting about this. And I thought, no, I've made Bastionland big enough that I can fit whatever I want in there. So there's just going to be a little bit of deep country that's all about knights riding dinosaurs and having weird bloodlines with weird abilities. So the Hellgullet Thuzzards, the Pilgrim Librarians, they're both from there. Gagan the Mountain Ape, I forget where he's from. I think he was something to do with, I did a post ages ago with backers' names in there. I don't know whose name ended up being Gagan. Jeremy Junkman is from that same post, because that's Jeremy Duncan, who at the time was a Patreon backer, and he got his name in a blog post, and he's ended up with his name in the book. And yeah, Moxia, just to show that there are sort of human-like mockeries out there. And the horses, I think we've spoken about this horse table before. I won't go on and on about it, but it was some of the most fun I've had doing writing, was writing 50 ridiculous horses. And then Arnold Kemp did the remaining 50, and we ended up with a D100 horses table. It's one of my proudest achievements, is coming up with all these dumb horses. One of my favourites here is Jeremus Faltine Gratias. Is pretty strong. I like that. I like Wiki Walter. It's just fun to say. Lucy Lasso, a deaf brown horse with a cowboy hat stuck on. Yeah, so if you're going to be they encounter stable in deep country, you've got to roll on this. You've got to do it. Fred Dorian Gray asks, was there a particular reason that you didn't want the deep country to be untamed wilderness? I think saying that it's not untamed is a bit unfair. I think really I just wanted to. I think there's a lot of. I've played a lot of games where there's untamed wilderness, and you go out and you're just kind of dealing with animals and stuff. And that is a thing in deep country. But I also wanted to have the human factor be there. So humans have spread across all of Bastionland. And Deep Country is old, is one of the sort of main things about it. And things were better before. So it just kind of made sense that if it was in decline, at some point, somebody had been to these places. So it could be someone from Bastion, it could be like an expedition, but more likely it's probably someone from Deep Country, someone local has been here. And it means you can ask people for help. You might find something that's been left there by people. So yeah, you can have big areas of wilderness, but I just like the idea that you're not stepping onto it like virgin snow. Like this place existed before you got here, and people have explored it before. And then conducting Deep Country continued. So I spoke about these touchstones last time, and how they're kind of a reflection of bastions. Some of the ones that I like that I've rolled before, in wildness, you got people treated as animals and animals treated as people as two different results, which is good. Either way, that ends up being quite fun. For tradition, exaggerated family traits is kind of a nod to that old Scuntroy setting, mini setting within a setting, if you like, where you had these bloodlines that had really exaggerated features, beyond what you'd normally consider to be human. And yeah, pettiness, inherited vendettas, slaughter parties. Again, it's left vague enough that you've got to work this out for yourself. So the spark tables here, they're good. They're no cocktail table and parlour games table from Bastion. I think they're a tough act to follow. Local flags, I do like a flag. I'm not sure how useful it is, but it tells you something about Deep Country that they have a lot of focus on flags. And places is just useful. It's almost too useful here, because the other spark tables have been kind of very light-hearted, but this is actually a really useful little table to have there. So that is Deep Country. We will go into the underground, but we will have a short intermission while I get another ice cube, because I'm going to make the second of our 2 drinks of the night. So, be right back. That was a sprint down to the fridge and back. It's too hot to be doing this kind of thing. The office that I use for these streams is like the hottest room in the house, so my ice cube really won't last long. So I'm going to speed through this next cocktail, because this is going to be nicer. And the reason is there's no fish sauce in it. So that's really the secret to cocktails, is stay away from fish sauce. It's not recommended. So I rolled gin and cherry wine. I did not have any cherry wine, but I did have cherries. So what I did was I've done an infusion of 4 black cherries in with some gin. This is a lot more promising already just from the smell. It smells pretty good. And I thought, if we're going to go cherry, then I'm going to go full cherry. So we're going to do an old-fashioned with gin, and everything is going to be cherry. So normally an old-fashioned would be your main spirit, usually whiskey, a bit of sugar for sweetness, and a bit of bitters. So Angostura bitters traditionally. For sweetness, we're going to use Luxardo Maraschino liqueur, which is a not terribly sweet liqueur. It's got quite a funky kind of like they leave the stone in for the production of it, so it's got a real kind of cherry and almond flavour, and also it's kind of funky because I think they use grappa as the sort of base spirit, like a grape spirit. We're just going to do like a teaspoon of that, because that's just for sweetness and a bit of that cherry flavour. Well, it's going to be very different to the flavour of the cherries. It really doesn't taste much like cherry at all. It's its own flavour. Then I also have cherry bitters instead of Angostura bitters. They are in fact cherry and Pinot Noir grape bitters. They were a birthday gift many years ago and they've nearly run out. But I'm going to put 2 good old dashes of that in because these are delicious and they're going to save this drink. And then we're going to do, I'll make sure there's no fish sauce left in here. It's okay, the fish sauce didn't touch this. I'm just going to do a double measure of our cherry infused gin. I'm not going to mess around with the camera because I've only just recovered from losing the focus. So we have our double measure of spirit, our sweetener, which is the maraschino liqueur, and we have our bitters. So that's a cherry gin old fashioned. We're going to give it a stir. People will tell you you've got to stir an old fashioned for like 20 minutes or something stupid. That's ridiculous. If you're using actual granulated sugar, it can take a while to mix it all in. But if you're using a liqueur or a syrup, you're really just stirring to get it cold, get it diluted. As I said last time, if you can make a big ice cube or just a big chunk of ice, that is the way to go. Bear with me. And we are done. That is our cherry old-fashioned, cherry gin old-fashioned. Oh, and that's actually just really nice and delicious cherry flavour. So as you can see, it is red hot in here. So let's crack back on. This is going to be simultaneously the most and least glamorous stream because I'm suffering with the heat and hay fever, but at least I get to enjoy a nice cocktail. Oh, and I'll give myself a cherry garnish as well. A cherry that's been soaking in gin for the last 48 hours. So the underground. The underground was always part of Bastionland, even back as far as Into the Yard. But it looks very different here. Again, I'm going to hide myself so you can enjoy this artwork. It's very different to what originally the underground was. In the first sort of drafts of Into the Yard, I think it might have even been called like the Underworld. But then I decided to just really lean into the idea of it as like part subway network, part mythic underworld. So you can see from the pictures here that what Alec has done is he's really lent into this idea that the principles. I'll get to the principles of it now because I think that's super important. Principles are it connects everything. Everything is a test, and it sits just beneath reality. And if I go back, yeah, I can see that it connects everything because everything is connected here. It's this sort of idea of like a maze almost, or like a mess of swirling, connecting lines. Is sort of the way that he's sort of represented this everything is connected idea. And one of my favourite bits is the people being chased by the train, right at the bottom there. I'd never know whether that's sort of intended to be taken literally, or whether that's just kind of a metaphor for what it's like to be in the underground. Everything is a test. Now, originally there was it was more. I think the original principle was everything is a challenge. But the more that I worked on the underground and the more that the machines got connected to the underground, the more that I leaned into this idea of testing. So it's very obviously inspired by Portal and GLaDOS. This idea of a sort of machine with its own crazed logic, just obsessed with creating these tests for people to go through. And I was worried that it was too on the nose, but I think it's just strong enough a reference that people will get into the idea of Portal and GLaDOS and that kind of feel, but they won't feel like they're just sticking an element of Portal into this game. So again, we've got a spark table. Let's get our D20s. 5 and 4. Rock Ghost. Great. Rock Ghost that's a tricky combination, and Preserved Blob is also tricky. So the thing with the underground is it is meant to be broad enough that you could just stick a D&D dungeon in here and it would work. But it's also meant to have a specific flavour of its own, so it doesn't just feel like, oh, we're in the dungeon, like the dungeon of Dungeons and Dragons. And I think the machines are really what make that work, because you can basically take the Tomb of Horrors and replace I've never had to say the name out loud, Acererak, the Lich. You can replace him with a machine, and you can theme all of the traps and stuff to be a bit more mechanical rather than magical. And I think you've got a good section of the underground there ready to go. So again, with the machines comes the idea of these creations. So the machines create things, they release them, and then they want to see what happens. So it could be monsters, it could be traps, it could be characters. Anything that you want to stick in a dungeon could have been created by a machine. So yeah, that's the underground. So mapping. This is the one that people get in touch with me more often than others of the mapping sections, and they say, do I have to use this or can I just do a normal dungeon map? Of course you can use a normal dungeon map, it will work. But this is just like, again, I wanted to sort of make a statement and say this is the method I would suggest that you use. And it's always a suggestion, as with everything. So I've lent into the route planning thing, and again it fits because the London Underground map was sort of the original inspiration for those Bastion node-based maps. So rather than each route being a different method of transport, like in Bastion, where you might have the red line be a tram line and the blue line be a canal, here each colour represents a theme. So it could be sewers, halls, brass vaults, or maintenance tunnels. And then, other than that, it's very similar to mapping Bastion. But you've got this little idea of stretches, which I wanted to put in there, just to really hammer across this idea of the space being weird. So you do a line with a little wiggly spiral, and every time the players enter that part of the underground, it's potentially different each time, and it represents a significant distance. So the underground is always moving around and shifting, and it's never quite the same. So each section you get to, each time you get to this section, it could be something entirely different. And yeah, there you go. So doors might sound like it's the most boring section, but I actually really like that this is here. And I think when I was filling out these pages, I just kind of put I put the heading in doors, thinking, okay, well, I'll write something about, I need to just make a list of what do I need to explain in the underground. So I need to explain how traps work. I need to explain how treasure works. And I think I just put doors as a placeholder. And then I thought, well, when I think about doors in Dungeons and Dragons, I don't think of many interesting doors. I'm sure there are exceptions. But when I think about doors, because I was raised on 3rd edition, if you like, when I think about doors in the DMG, I just remember, I remember reading through the Dungeon Master's Guide, 3rd edition, and there was so much emphasis put on the mechanical side of like doors and walls. Like it would have the break DC for different types of door and their hit points and hardness ratings and stuff, and that's not what's going to make a door memorable. And not everything has to be memorable. Sometimes a door is just a door, and it's a strong door that can't be broken down easily, and that's fine. It can still create interesting situations where you happen to bring the piece of equipment that you need to blast open this vault door. But in the underground, a door is rarely just a door, and they are as likely to be useful as dangerous, and machines have control over them. So it could be that the door is controlled by its own machine, like it has a little terminal and it will talk to you and it wants certain things before it will let you past. It could be that there are two doors nearby that don't like each other and each have their own agenda, and you have to sort of, you're only going to earn the favour of one door, and you've got to decide which side you're going to take. So yeah, a door can just be a door, but in the underground, that's rarely the case. And that is, oh no, it's not. I forgot this bit here, which has been the subject of much difficulty. I'll get to this. So again, there's a little bit of repetition here when it comes to making danger obvious, making danger effective, but I don't mind repeating something if I think that it's important. And some of this is repetition of earlier points rephrased, but I think it's worth restating. And then the encounters. There's quite a few on here that I've actually had memorable uses at the table. So, Hell Train. So anybody that's read Spire RPG, which has been followed up with Heart RPG now, made by the team at Rome, Rook and Deckard. They have their own version of the Underground, which was independently designed from my version of the Underground in a kind of Bug's Life and Ants way, or Deep Impact and Armageddon, if you like. We sort of both came up with the same idea separately and released it around a similar time, but they really lean into this Hell Train idea. So that was in there before I knew that they would be working on this book with me as consultants. But the things that I remember working really well here at my table are the big mouth mounted on the wall that answered the previous question. It's a silly, stupid little thing, but I've had some fun with that. The Merger Man. Now, I don't encourage this because it could end up being an uncomfortable thing, but I was playing this at a table with some friends, and the way that I sort of had this work is, so it was this monster that wanted to like merge two beings together. So we grabbed two characters rather, and sort of smashed them together and like merge, and they kind of conjoined to each other. So I actually made them go and sit next to each other and kind of lean their shoulders against each other and say, if you take your shoulders off each other now, you're going to take some damage. And I don't advise you do this at your table, because you shouldn't encourage people to go and have to have contact with each other if they don't want to. But with the two friends that I had, I thought I was pretty safe, and they were both pretty comfortable with it. But I do like these silly little metagame things sneaking in. So the listeners is another example. So the listeners, they overhear everything said at the table. Now, I'm sure this is a trick as old as time itself, where the monsters can hear what the players are saying at the table. So if they say, oh, should we kill these guys? Out of character, then the listeners hear it. So it's a cheap trick, but it's some good fun. And then, yeah, you've got just more encounters. The D6 things banished from the stars starts to get a little bit extreme, and this is where you've got the closest to actual like alien beings in the game, I guess. So that takes us to the touchstones that I mentioned earlier. Again, there is definitely a connection with these touchstones between Deep Country, Bastion, and the Underground. They're definitely sort of mirrors of each other. But the thing that I really like here is these spark tables. I find these really useful. So tunnel aesthetic, you've got another little nod out to Into the Odd. You've got iron coral as a kind of material that you might encounter in the Underground. You can make a deep canon theory here as to what that says about the nature of the Iron Coral in Into the Odd. But yeah, that gives you at least a starting point for your sections. So yeah, let's do some rolling. So if I'm creating 2 sections of the underground, I will have 19 and 13. So the obstacle is coal and smoke, and the look is iron coral. So that it's like maybe it's the engine room of the iron coral, and the iron coral is actually a sort of spaceship powered by coal. And what hazards do we have awaiting us in this kind of engine room of the iron coral? We've got the warning is deep singing. We hear deep singing off in the distance, and the danger is abduction. So what kind of weird being is manning this engine? And are they going to abduct you and maybe feed you into the furnace? Oh, I've been hidden this whole time, which is probably for the best. Fred Dorian Gray, do you picture the underground as more advanced than the rest of Bastion technologically? I think because it's sort of the machines are a part of it, and the machines are kind of implied to be like kind of post-singularity machines. I think it does often have a kind of more advanced feel than Bastion itself, and also the fact that it connects to the living stars, which are kind of seen. So Bastion is kind of seen as like the present, in the sense that they're living in the moment and they're embracing their modernity, and everything's about what's happening now and how great things are now. Deep Country is all about the past, and the living stars are very loosely about kind of the future and possibility and ideas and what might happen and what could be in alternate timelines. And the underground is kind of the connector between all those. So it doesn't really pull much out from Deep Country towards Bastion. That doesn't feel like it's a natural flow, but it feels right that it's kind of pulling things from the living stars into Bastion. So it feels like it does have a more technologically advanced feel than Bastion itself. So we are at the end of the world of Bastionland. We are nearly on an hour, but there's been a good break in the middle of this, so I'm going to do 1 or 2 of these Inhabitants of Bastionland section. I'm not going to go through all 5 of them, but I can also explain the sort of the general principle behind this section. And the principle was that I didn't want to just have a bank of monsters that players could read about and the conductor could just pull out and use. I wanted everything to be unique. So if you are running the game and you want to have a big scary monster, you've got to create your own and make it unique. This collage, I'm gonna hide myself again, because this collage definitely bears looking at, because one of the things that I wanted in Bastionland was just a lot of diversity of beings, and I mean that in every sense of the word. So I wanted like diversity in the human sense, but I didn't want you to come up with a cool idea for a monster or a character and think, it doesn't really fit. I didn't want you to think, no, it doesn't fit in Bastionland. I wanted you to think, well, here's where it would fit. It would fit in this bit of Bastionland. And you can see here from just the variety of beings that we've got that, I think we kind of delivered on that. And that's how I sort of landed on this idea of templates. So I didn't want to just give you guidance and say, off you go, create a monster. I wanted you to at least have a starting point. So we'll get to that as we get to the next section, sort of how it works with the templates and the sort of the spark tables. But the main thing here that I really wanted to get across in this kind of opening spiel was, don't worry about the numbers. Usually if I'm making an NPC, I don't worry about giving them strength, dex and charisma scores, unless one of them is truly exceptional. So if they are an extremely clumsy person, I would give them like dex 5. if they're a very charismatic person, I'd give them like Dex 17 or whatever. But I would just assume most things are 10, because it's not interesting to know that this person has Strength 8, Dex 10, Charisma 11. To me, it's not. That's not interesting. I'd rather spend that space on the page and that time and that creative energy in coming up with a more interesting character. People will remember that you gave this person a stupid accent, or they'll remember that they had this weird quirk about them, but they will not remember that you gave them Strength 13. So let's look at the first of these inhabitants of Bastionland, which of course is humans, because humans come first in Bastion. So again, like I said, people, there are all sorts, and they're everywhere. All sorts of people in Bastion. Everybody relies on somebody else, and they're always in your way. So yes, there are all sorts of people. This is one of my favourite images in the book, because this could easily be like the iconic party of Electric Bastionland. You got weird little fly man, woman with a hat, top hat and eye patch is always a strong look, and diving suit. You know, this is a party right here. So it's all about making people work in the gameplay, and I think a lot of people try and make the characters, again, this is my own opinions, but I think I've found that when I've tried to make my characters too deep and too complex, it doesn't land, and the players aren't really aware of it, and maybe that's a failing on how I portray them, but generally they remember it if I make them over the top and a bit silly. And it doesn't have to be like full-on humour. I just mean silly in the sense that they are larger than life, and you kind of amplify the memorable things about them. So, you know, give them a visual gimmick. Top hat and eye patch. It's a little bit silly, but they'll remember that. Amplify it into their personality, or contrast it, and tie them to another character. So it's getting this kind of tangled web of characters, so everybody knows each other and everyone's connected. And then there's just this idea of like you can use people as more than just NPCs. So NPCs that people need to contact because they are the blacksmith or they are the quest giver. If you're in a city, there's people everywhere, and they can be an obstacle, they can be a complication, they can be a resource, they can be an enemy, they can be like a force of nature. If the players have a question, put the answer inside a person. And if you want to tell the players something, tell it them through a person. So that's a trick that I learned quite late on, and I actually found it's really useful. Like if there's something I'm thinking, like if I'm thinking, why haven't they thought of this? Or if I want to know, why is this player acting in this way? I ask them through a character, and it just makes it feel a bit more, it's more diegetic, it's part of the world. There's some silly tricks for names, and then you've got these templates, which are your kind of, exactly what it sounds like. That's the skeleton that you then put your flavour onto. And I worked hard on these to make it so that they did have a little bit of flavour on their own. So the street smart civilian, it's not just a generic person. They're a street smart civilian with chewing gum. They love gossip. They have got an obsession outside of their profession. And they've got a weapon, but they don't really want to use it. So it's not like ultra bland generic. It tells you a bit, but it's broad enough that this probably applies to most people in Bastion. And then the spark table is like the layer of skin that you put on top of the bones. That's a disgusting analogy for you. So let's see who this character is. Their manner is they are very blunt, and their drive is safety. They just want to be safe, and they're very blunt about it. So that's your character. Or if you didn't like that, you might have got 16 and 9, which is they have a gentle manner, but their drive is justice. They want gentle justice. Interesting. Mockeries. So I've spoken about these before. I'm quite glad that Alec was not a big Muppet fan, I believe, much to my shock. And I said to him, look, mockeries are basically Muppets, but don't make them look just like Muppets, because I kind of like the idea that they're their own thing. And yeah, I think he's nailed it here. They're like weird little artificial beings, but they don't look Muppety. And I just love this goat. Something about the way they're holding their hands together. Yeah, Wasteland Synth. Gentle Justice, how topical. Indeed. So, with Mockeries, I really wanted to get the essence of the Muppet in there without just saying the word Muppet. So, the word felt is, I feel, like the main red flag. Creatures are felt wood and string, given the spark of life. They act human, but their needs are only imitated. Children love them, real animals hate them. And that's your Mockeries. Oso Taki says, Mockeries are probably my favourite thing in the setting. They're kind of the one thing that's weirdly specific here. So, I've got, every setting has people. Machines are kind of, there's not many settings that have these there's certainly not many non-sci-fi settings that have kind of AI machines as a kind of antagonist. Aliens, again, sci-fi all over the place. Mockeries, I guess the closest thing is kind of like Warforged in Eberron. They're kind of meant to be like, Bastionland does draw from a lot from kind of sci-fi feel rather than traditional fantasy. It's kind of sci-fi through a fantasy lens almost. And that was always the goal early on. With Into the Odd, I wanted to have some sci-fi trappings in a fantasy D&D like game, like the kind of taking the expedition to the Barrier Peaks feel and applying it to a whole game. And Mockeries are kind of they could be seen as kind of your like clone equivalent, or even like your kind of like android equivalent, I guess, or like uplifted animals to some extent. And I think the reason they work is, the reason they always work well in my games anyway, is people have preconceptions about animals. So let's roll one up, and I'll use this as an example. So we've gone into a bar, and we know this is a Mockery bar. So the person running the bar is going to be 18 and 18. They are a bunny, and their talent is engineering. So the fact that they are a bunny, not even a rabbit, a bunny, tells you immediately you've got something in there. There's a seed of an idea. It might be different for you and me. You might be thinking of Bugs Bunny. I might be thinking of the Duracell bunny. I might be thinking of Watership Down with the kind of brutal rabbit action that was in that old film. But rabbits come loaded with tropes already. And giving them a talent like engineering humanizes them. So what would it look like if a rabbit was an engineer? It's a very straightforward concept, but it gives you an interesting character straight away. And yeah, you've got your templates are here again. Mock Colossus is always fun. One of my favourite pictures here is this kind of Michelin Man style Mock Colossus. But yeah, I still love the Mockeries, and I'm still really glad that I decided to go for it, because it's so close to being too silly that the first time you explain it to people, I always worry that people are going to be like, what, really? Like, we're playing this kind of industrial urban setting, and now you're telling me that there's a sort of frog running the bar, like a felt frog. Yeah, it's so close to being too silly, but so far everyone I've run it for has had a really positive reaction to the Mockeries. It just kind of works. So machines, I've spoken about machines already in the Underground, but I wanted to get across the idea that they aren't just, not to think of them as just like a big box in a room, like a big server. They could be a mobile machine, sort of being wheeled around in a little trolley. They could be a holographic machine. Maybe they project an image throughout their section of the Underground. And then the kind of more classic structural machine is the one that's kind of like a big computer, basically, living in the underground. We've got another brain in a jar reference to add to the list. And then we're going to roll 13 and 1. So the visual prompt is a PA system, and they're old and grumpy. See, this part of the underground is sort of controlled by this machine that speaks to you through PA system that's scattered around the tunnels, and they're sort of old and grumpy and crotchety. Again, it's quite an easy thing to grab, even though it's kind of not unique in its entirety, but it's unique to this kind of D&D setting. You don't see this kind of thing very often, and I'm not going to say they're like the equivalent to undead, but they fill a little bit the same niche of undead in that they don't have any biological needs. If you need to have just something that's there to guard a room, you can create a machine or a machine creation, and it makes sense that it's just sat there waiting for intruders. I've said about liches and how machines make a good kind of equivalent to liches. A croaky. Tangentially to mockeries, are there uplifted animals? I assume yes, because of the good dog career. The good dog isn't really uplifted, he's just a good dog. Like, it says that he's smarter than many people, but the intention isn't that that dog is sort of like artificially intelligent. It's the intention is just that it's a really good dog. But as always with any question, like, are there this in Bastion? The answer is yes, because everything is here. Just because I've not written about it doesn't mean they're not. One thing that I did have that was kind of similar to mockeries was I had this idea of what were they called? Animal monarchs or animal patrons, or I can't remember. There was a blog post anyway that I wrote about like how each breed of animal had like a ruler. The most obvious example being the Worm Queen that made her way into the adventure that I wrote for Electric Bastionland, the Prison of the Worm Queen. But there was like a tortoise council, and there was like a maggot prince, and there was like a different ruler for each one. They were kind of like exaggerated versions of the animal. That's somewhere on the blog. If you go there and search for Worm Queen, you'll find it. But yeah, I kind of put that idea in the background because I didn't want to overload the book with too many ideas. And if you had an idea for a cool animal type thing, I was like, put it as a mockery, because that's the focus. But if you're comfortable making your own thing, then make your own thing, absolutely. Aliens are very vague. So I've expanded on this a little bit now that I've spoken about Intergalactic Bastionland a little bit on the blog. That will go into aliens. But here I wanted them to be, again, very open because they represent possibilities. So if it's not an animal thing that you've got, and it's not a machine thing that you've got, and it doesn't work as a person, make it an alien. So if you wanted to have, let me think of a D&D example. If you wanted to have the equivalent to a devil, like a chain devil, let's say. Chain devil's a bad example because I'd do that as a machine, but you could do it as an alien. You could have any kind of, or like a salamander or a genie. I would make those things aliens and change enough of them so that they are interesting again. So they're not hostile. They're not here to be monsters, but they have their own. They're different, hence the name. So they're not there to be hostile, but hostility is always an option. And then we've got some examples, and let's do a spark table roll. We have 15 and 16. The Divine Breakers. So I like this as kind of a naming thing as well. What I didn't want was to have aliens that had names like just a string of letters with apostrophes, and it's like, oh, they're an alien, so of course they'd have like a weird alien name.
I like giving them relatively plain speech names that don't always make sense. So Divine Breakers, it's not immediately obvious what they do, but it gives you enough of an idea to run with it. And I think... Oh, no, we've got monstrosities. Is that the last bit? Yeah. So we will finish off this inhabitant section. So monstrosities, up until relatively late in the process, this was called abominations. But abomination implies some kind of impurity, or the idea that there's more of a sense of right and wrong. And monstrosities is still, it's still a very similar word to abomination. But I didn't want to have this kind of idea that they were like unholy or something, because that doesn't really fit with the setting. So I changed it to monstrosities to just be a sense that within all the categories that we previously had, there are things that are changed beyond their original type, if you like. So monsters are not born. Nothing is born as a monster. They are made a monster. They always attract attention, and there's always a compelling set of reasons to see them destroyed. So if you're going to make something that's a monstrosity, it can't be 100% sympathetic. They definitely should be sympathetic to some extent, but it should always feel like a decision of like, oh, this monstrosity, our life would be easier if we just got rid of it. And then if they do decide to kill it, then that's on them. So every monstrosity starts out as something different, basically, and you work your way through these spark tables, and it kind of tells you what it is, what happened to it, and what weird abilities does it have. And they're all unique, but they're drawn to others. So there's a lot of like Frankenstein stuff going on here, but it's a strong concept, so I thought I'd lean into it here. So let's do some rolling. 8 and 6. So our monstrosity was originally an insect, and their modifier is country religion. So I'm imagining, when I think of religion and insects, I think of locusts. So maybe in the deep country there is a sort of locust cult, and maybe they deliberately raise their crops to attract these locusts, and they sort of like run out into the fields and dance around with the locusts while they're devouring the crops. And maybe this kind of religious ceremony, talking about uplifted animals, maybe they kind of uplifted these locusts, kind of like merged into like one intelligent swarm type being, like a sort of gestalt entity. So let's do the sparks table for this weird locust swarm. 1616. Theme: amorality. Well, I guess insects are pretty immoral. That's a tough one. Some of these are quite tricky. Yeah, so I guess amorality, they just don't care what they eat. They're just eating to survive. And then the danger is that they create oddities. So maybe these locusts, I've no idea how locusts behave in real life, but let's imagine that they're this kind of weird like locust termite hybrid. So they sort of devour the crops, and then maybe like they rebuild, or maybe they sort of like they sweep in to like Bastion, and they sort of devour buildings, and kind of they sort of regurgitate the stone and brick and kind of create their own oddities. Nobody knows why they're creating these things. Yeah, there you go. So there's a reason to want to destroy them, because they're creating these oddities that could fall into anyone's hands. Yeah, there you go. Piece of cake. So I think that is pretty swift work today. And next time we will be moving on to the addendum. The addendum is going to be a tricky one to go through because there's just a lot of it's just a lot of articles and it's a lot of thoughts and rants. So I think we'll probably try and get through that in one episode next week. So if we can get through that, then we'll do one more at least as kind of a sign off on this whole deep dive. But yeah, we could be just 2 deep dives away from the finish now. If you've got any more questions, I can see I've got one queued up that I'll answer. But if you've got any more, I'll be finishing the stream shortly. Caution May Bite says, would the Skeksis in Dark Crystal be considered a monstrosity or an alien? I've never seen Dark Crystal, I know. It's are they those bird guys? Let's have a look. I'm now googling Skeksis. Yeah, are they the vulture kind of guys? Is that right? I need to watch Dark Crystal, but looking at them, I'm basing this purely off what Google image searchers fired back at me and what little I've seen of Dark Crystal, like clips. I'm going to say they're an alien. They look like a good representation of an alien to me. You could make a case that they're like a mock vulture. Maybe they're like a mock vulture that's pretending to be an alien. Maybe they've that's their thing. They're like alien cosplayers, mock vultures, but they kind of apply just enough prosthetics that they don't quite look like a mockery. So yeah, that's my official canon on the Skeksis from Dark Crystal. So next week, let me just jump back to this for a second. And yeah, I'm not going to go into this now. But next week we will be looking at this, the addendum. So if you have any questions on any points in the addendum for next week, make sure you ask, because next week's going to be a bit, like I say, it's going to be a bit tricky. Because there's a lot of just like wall of text. And the risk is that I'm just like repeating everything that's written in the addendum. But it will perhaps be my kind of generic, like, here are my extra thoughts on Electric Bastionland that didn't fit in the book. Maybe that'll be the kind of theme for next week. So yeah, potentially the last ever Electric Bastionland deep dive next week as we know it. I don't think I'll be doing any more cocktails. I think it's not helped with this kind of steam box that I'm in. Having 2 cocktails inside me has not helped with that. Next week we're going to be back on ginger beer for sure. No more fish sauce. But I can recommend the second cocktail. The cherry gin old fashioned went down very nicely. But much like I said, I don't like to drink and write. I think drinking and streaming is not going to be a good combination for me. So thank you everyone for tuning in, and I will see you again next week. I'm going to get the sign off ready this week. We're gonna nail it, okay? I will see you again next week for Electric Bastionland deep dive, potentially finale. See you then. Stay safe.